My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 35 years old, and the two people sitting across the courtroom right now, the ones whispering excitedly to their attorney about the $7.2 million inheritance they think they're about to win, those are the parents who left me in a bus station when I was 6 years old. They don't recognize me. Not yet. They think the judge walking in today is just another stranger in a black robe. In about 30 seconds, they're going to realize something that will change their lives forever, because the bailiff just stepped forward and cleared his throat. All rise. Chairs scraped against the polished floor. Conversations died mid-sentence. My parents stood up with everyone else. The courtroom doors opened behind me, and the bailiff's voice echoed through the chamber. All rise for the Honorable Judge, Olivia Carter. I walked past them, close enough to smell my mother's cheap rose perfume, close enough to hear my father's impatient sigh. Neither of them looked at my face. Why would they? To them, their daughter had been gone for nearly 30 years. Dead, lost, vanished, depending on which version of the story they were telling. I stepped up the 3 wooden stairs to the bench, turned, sat down, and for the first time, my parents actually looked at me. The confusion hit first, then recognition crept across their faces like frost spreading across glass. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father staggered backward a step. The smirk on their attorney's face dissolved instantly, because the little girl they had thrown away in 1997 wasn't gone after all. She was the one holding the gavel. But before I tell you how we got here, I want to ask you something. If the people who brought you into this world treated you like a piece of garbage, if they abandoned you when you were too small to understand why, if they came back decades later demanding millions of dollars from you, would you forgive them? Or would you destroy them completely? Be honest. Because by the time this story ends, you'll have to decide whether what I did was justice or revenge. The year was 1997. Denver, Colorado. The old Union Station bus terminal smelled like diesel fumes, burnt coffee, and wet concrete. I remember the smell more clearly than anything else. Smell is strange like that. You forget faces. You forget voices. But smells stay. I was 6 years old, small enough that the wooden bench swallowed half my body when I sat down. My feet didn't touch the ground. They swung back and forth slowly while people rushed past me carrying duffel bags and suitcases. My mother, Linda Carter, was pacing near the ticket counter. My father, Mark Carter, kept checking the time on his wristwatch. They looked annoyed. Not sad, not worried, just irritated, like parents stuck in a long line at the grocery store. "Olivia, stay right here," my mother said sharply. She pointed to the bench like she was assigning a seat in a classroom. "Don't move." I clutched the only thing I had brought with me, a blue knitted scarf. It was too warm for a scarf, even in November, but I liked the way the yarn felt between my fingers. It had been a gift from my grandmother before she passed away. When I was nervous, I twisted the loose threads around my thumb. "Where are you going?" I asked. My father didn't look at me. "We need to talk to the ticket agent." "About what?" "Just wait." My mother crouched in front of me and forced a smile. "Count the buses," she said. "What? See all the buses pulling in and leaving?" I nodded. "Count to 200. When you're done, we'll be back." "Okay." She kissed the top of my head. It felt quick, automatic, like checking a box on a to-do list. Then they walked away. I watched them weave through the crowd. My dad opened the station doors. Cold wind rushed inside. They stepped out into the parking lot. The door closed. I started counting. 1 bus. 2 buses. 3. A Greyhound pulled in with a long hiss of brakes. Passengers climbed out carrying bags and pillows. A man dropped his coffee. Someone laughed. 4 buses. 5. 6. The station slowly emptied as night crept in. 7. 8. 9. The overhead lights buzzed softly. 10. 11. 12. The ticket counter closed. The janitor started mopping the floor. 20. 30. 40. My stomach began to hurt. 50. 60. 70. I twisted the blue scarf tighter around my hands. 80. 90. 100. The last bus pulled away. The station fell quiet. I kept counting. 110. 120. 130. My parents didn't come back. 150. 150. My voice became a whisper. 190. 200. I looked toward the door. They still weren't there, even at 6 years old. Something inside me understood. Kids know things adults think they don't. The way my parents had looked earlier. The way they had avoided my eyes. The way my dad's shoulders relaxed when the station doors closed behind him. They weren't coming back. The realization settled over me slowly, heavy, cold, like snow piling up on your chest. A little girl sitting alone on a bus station bench, clutching a scarf, waiting for parents who had already decided she didn't belong to them anymore. I don't know how long I sat there. Time stretches when you're small. Minutes feel like hours. Eventually, a security guard noticed me. He was a big man with a gray mustache and tired eyes. "Hey there," he said gently. "You lost, sweetheart?" sweetheart? I shook my head. Where are your parents? I pointed toward the doors. They went to get tickets. How long ago? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. And because I was suddenly terrified that if I said the wrong thing, I would disappear completely. The guard frowned. He reached for his radio. Then another voice spoke behind him. Excuse me. The guard turned. A tall man in a dark overcoat stood a few feet away. He had silver hair and rectangular glasses. He looked like someone's grandfather, but his eyes were sharp, observant, kind. I believe that child has been sitting there for quite a while, he said. The guard sighed. Yeah, looks like it. He knelt in front of me. What's your name? Olivia. Last name? Carter. Do you know your parents' phone number? I shook my head. The man in the overcoat crouched beside the guard. He didn't touch me. He didn't try to comfort me. He just looked at me directly. My name is Daniel Whitmore, he said quietly. I'm sorry this is happening to you. Those words mattered more than anything. He didn't pretend my parents would come back. He didn't lie. He just told the truth. The guard called child services. Police arrived. Questions followed. Hours passed. Daniel Whitmore stayed the entire time. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have left after 10 minutes. But he remained there until they loaded me into a patrol car. And just before the door closed, he leaned down and said something I would remember for the rest of my life. You are not something people throw away. The foster system is a strange place. Some homes are kind, some are cruel, most are temporary. For the next 3 years, I moved between 4 different houses, different schools, different beds, different rules. I barely spoke. The silence from that bus station followed me everywhere. Teachers called me shy. Social workers called me withdrawn. But Daniel Whitmore never forgot about me. He visited every month, sometimes bringing books, sometimes bringing puzzles. Once he brought hot chocolate, and we sat quietly on a park bench watching snowfall. Eventually, when I turned 9, he asked a simple question. Would you like to come live with me? I said yes. And for the first time since that bus station bench, I finally had a home. Daniel Whitmore wasn't rich, or at least, that's what everyone believed. He lived in a modest house outside Boulder. He drove an old Honda. He wore the same brown coat every winter. But he was patient, calm, steady. He helped me with homework, taught me how to cook pancakes, encouraged me to read law books when I became fascinated by courtroom dramas on television. You ask good questions, he used to say. You should become a lawyer someday. So I did. Years passed. High school, college, law school. Every graduation ceremony, Daniel sat in the front row clapping louder than anyone else. He never talked much about his past, only that he used to work in finance. That was it. Nothing flashy, nothing mysterious. Just a quiet man who had stepped into a bus station one night and changed a child's life forever. Daniel Whitmore died when I was 33 years old. A heart attack. Sudden. Peaceful. The funeral was small. Just a few friends. Some former colleagues. And me. Afterward, his attorney asked me to stay for the reading of the will. I expected the house. Maybe a small savings account. Instead, the lawyer slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were investment documents, stock certificates, partnership agreements. I stared at the numbers. Is this correct? I asked. The lawyer nodded. Daniel Whitmore hadn't just worked in finance. He had been one of the earliest investors in 3 technology companies that exploded during the early 2000s. He lived modestly because he gave most of his money away quietly to charities. But what remained, he left to me. Total value of the estate, $7.2 million. I sat there stunned. The man who rescued a scared child from a bus station had just handed her a future. But the story didn't end there, because 2 days after the will became public, someone knocked on my door. A process server? Judge Olivia Carter? Yes. You've been served. I opened the envelope and saw 2 names I hadn't read in nearly 30 years. Mark Carter, Linda Carter. My biological parents. They were suing me for the entire inheritance. The first thing I felt when I saw their names on the lawsuit wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness either. It was something colder, something more precise. The kind of emotional detachment that judges learn after years on the bench. You don't react. You analyze. I set the papers down on my kitchen table and read the complaint again. Then a third time. By the 4th reading, I wasn't Olivia Carter, the abandoned daughter, anymore. I was Judge Carter reviewing a case file. And the story my parents told in that lawsuit was impressive. Completely fictional, but impressive. According to the complaint, my parents had spent 29 years searching for their kidnapped daughter. They claimed that in 1997, a stranger had lured me away from Union Station while they were buying bus tickets. They claimed they had reported the abduction immediately. They claimed law enforcement had failed them. They claimed a wealthy man, Daniel Whitmore, had illegally taken custody of me and hidden my identity. The final demand was printed clearly on page 14. $7,200,000 $100,000 in damages, plus legal fees, plus control of Daniel Whitmore's estate. My parents weren't asking to reconnect. They weren't asking to meet. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were trying to collect a payout, like I was an insurance policy that had finally matured. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. It was quiet in the house. Too quiet. Daniel's house had always felt warm while he was alive. Now it felt like an empty courtroom after hours. The blue scarf sat folded beside the lawsuit. I rubbed the fabric between my fingers the same way I had done as a child. Something about the texture helped me think. Most people, when sued for millions of dollars, immediately panic. They call lawyers. They prepare defenses. They try to settle. I didn't do any of those things. Because one thing about this lawsuit bothered me. Not the money, not the accusations, the timing. If my parents had spent 3 decades searching for their missing daughter, why did they only come forward after the inheritance became public? Why not sooner? Why not when I graduated law school? Why not when I became a judge? Why not when I appeared in dozens of local news interviews over the years? My name had been public record for over a decade, yet somehow they found me within 48 hours of the inheritance announcement. That meant one thing. They hadn't been searching for me. They had been waiting for a payday. And people who think like that rarely start their schemes late in life. No. People like Mark and Linda Carter had probably been running cons their entire lives, which meant the real story likely started much earlier than my bus station abandonment. So I picked up the phone. There was one person in Colorado who specialized in digging through financial lies, a forensic accountant with a reputation for dismantling fraud cases like a surgeon removing tumors. Her name was Rachel Monroe, and she answered on the second ring. Monroe Investigations. Rachel, it's Olivia Carter. A pause, then a low whistle. The judge with the surprise $7 million inheritance? That's me. I saw the news. Then you probably also saw the lawsuit. Another pause. I did. Her voice changed slightly, more serious now. You want to fight them? It wasn't a question. Yes. Good, she said, because something about their story smells like gasoline. I smiled slightly. I need you to go back to 1997. How far back? All the way. Silence filled the phone line for a moment. Then Rachel asked the most important question. What exactly am I looking for? I looked down at the lawsuit again, at the fabricated story about a kidnapping. Anything that proves they're lying. Rachel arrived at my house the next morning with 3 laptops, a portable scanner, and enough coffee to keep a newsroom awake for a week. My dining room table became our war room. Stacks of documents spread across the surface. Tax filings, property records, court archives, old newspaper databases. Rachel worked with a speed that was almost frightening. Her fingers moved across the keyboard like a concert pianist. You know what's funny? She said after 2 hours. What? Most criminals think time protects them. I leaned against the counter sipping coffee. It doesn't? No? She tapped the laptop screen. Time preserves mistakes. I watched as she pulled up a county property database. Your parents bought a house in 1998, she said. I frowned. That's 1 year after I disappeared. Exactly. How much? Rachel whistled again. $380,000. That might not sound extraordinary today, but in 1998, that was an expensive house. And my parents had never been wealthy. My father worked odd construction jobs. My mother floated between part-time retail positions. Even as a child, I knew we struggled with money. So how did they suddenly afford a house worth nearly $400,000? Rachel must have been thinking the same thing. Let's check their tax records. She pulled another file, then another. Her eyebrows slowly lifted. Interesting? What? Their reported income in 1997 was... She turned the screen toward me. $28,400. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed exactly what I had been thinking. That's not enough to buy a house? Nope. Rachel clicked deeper into the records. Mortgage applications, financial disclosures, and then suddenly she froze. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. Oh. The word came out quietly, like someone spotting a shark fin in the water. What is it? I asked. Rachel slowly leaned back in her chair. Then she turned the screen toward me again. I think I found it. The document was a scanned court filing. Civil litigation. Denver County District Court. The case title sat in bold letters at the top. Mark Carter and Linda Carter versus Greyhound Lines, Inc. Date filed February 1998. My stomach twisted. Open it. Rachel clicked. Page after page in the screen. Legal language. Witness statements. Damage claims. And then we found the heart of the case. The complaint alleged that Greyhound Bus Lines had negligently allowed a 6-year-old child to wander away from Union Station without supervision. That child was me. According to my parents, they had briefly stepped away from the waiting area to purchase tickets. During that time, Greyhound employees had failed to monitor the station properly. As a result, their beloved daughter Olivia Carter Carter vanished without a trace. The document described two devastated parents searching desperately for their missing child. It described sleepless nights, police investigations, media appeals, heartbroken grief. It described everything except the truth, because I remembered exactly what happened that night. They didn't step away to buy tickets. They walked out the door and left me there. Rachel scrolled to the final pages. Her finger stopped on a highlighted section. This is the part you need to see. I leaned closer. Settlement agreement. Greyhound Lines Inc. had agreed to settle the lawsuit out of court to avoid prolonged litigation and negative publicity. The payment amount sat at the bottom of the page. $520,000. My chest felt suddenly hollow. They had been paid $500,000 for my disappearance. But that wasn't the worst part. Rachel clicked the final attachment. There's an affidavit included in the settlement. The scanned document appeared on screen. A sworn statement signed by both of my parents. Rachel read the key sentence out loud. We, Mark and Linda Carter, acknowledge that our daughter Olivia Carter is presumed deceased and accept this settlement as final compensation for the loss of our child. The room went silent. The words blurred slightly as I stared at them. Presumed deceased. They had signed a legal document declaring their 6-year-old daughter dead. Not missing. Not lost. Dead. In exchange for $500,000. Rachel leaned back slowly. Your parents didn't just abandon you, she said quietly. They sold you. The blue scarf tightened in my fist. For 30 years, I had wondered why they left. Maybe they couldn't afford another child. Maybe they panicked. Maybe they thought someone else would take care of me. All those years, part of me had tried to soften the truth. But the affidavit destroyed those illusions. They hadn't made a desperate mistake. They had made a business decision. I sat down across from Rachel. My voice felt strangely calm. How airtight is this? She folded her arms. Completely. Explain. Rachel tapped the screen. If they admit you're alive now, then they committed insurance fraud and civil fraud in 1998. And if they maintain the story that I died, she smiled thinly, then they have no legal standing to sue you for an inheritance. The trap had already formed. My parents had built it themselves. They just didn't realize they were standing inside it. Rachel closed the laptop slowly. So what do you want to do? I looked out the window. Snow had started falling outside, soft flakes drifting past the glass. For a moment, I was 6 years old again, sitting alone in a bus station, counting buses, waiting for parents who never came back. Then I looked back at the affidavit, at the signatures at the bottom, my father's jagged handwriting, my mother's neat loops, the receipt for my life. I want them in court. Rachel nodded. You realize what this means? Yes. This isn't just a defense anymore. I know. You're about to destroy them. I folded the blue scarf carefully and placed it beside the laptop. For years I had carried the memory of that night like a wound, something fragile, something painful. But now it felt different. Now it felt like evidence. They already destroyed themselves. I said quietly, all I'm going to do, I paused, is show the truth. And the truth was about to walk into a courtroom. The trial was scheduled for early spring, 3 months after the lawsuit was filed, 3 months for rumors to spread, 3 months for reporters to start circling like vultures around the story, because the media loved it. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Wealthy judge sued by long-lost parents. Couple claims daughter was kidnapped 29 years ago. Most news outlets treated my parents like grieving victims. They showed old photographs of a missing 6-year-old girl. They replayed emotional interviews with my mother wiping tears from her eyes. I never stopped searching for my baby, she told a local reporter. I prayed every single night that she would come home. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't lived the truth, I might have believed her myself. But I knew exactly what that voice sounded like when the cameras weren't rolling. Sharp, impatient, cold. The same voice that had told me to count the buses. My attorney, Daniel Ruiz, watched one of the interviews on his tablet during a meeting in my chambers. She's good, he said. I nodded. She always was. Ruiz looked up at me. You understand what they're doing? Of course. They're building a narrative. He turned the tablet so I could see the screen. My mother sat on a couch beside my father during the interview. Their hands were clasped tightly together. United. Heartbroken. We never gave up hope, my father said. They told us she was gone, but a parent knows. A parent always knows. Ruiz muted the video. This kind of emotional framing works on juries. I know. You seem calm. I am. He studied me for a moment. You're not angry? I considered the question carefully. I was, I said finally, for a long time. And now I'm curious. Ruiz raised an eyebrow. About what? How long they think they can keep lying. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Reporters filled the gallery. Cameras waited outside in the hallway. The case had become a local spectacle. On one side of the courtroom sat Mark and Linda Carter. They looked older, of course. My father's hair had gone gray. My mother's face had softened with age. age, but the expressions were the same, carefully rehearsed sadness. Their attorney, Paul Hendrickson, stood confidently beside them. He was a skilled litigator, charismatic, convincing, exactly the kind of lawyer who could sell an emotional story to a jury. When court began, he opened with a powerful statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, pacing slowly in front of the box. "This case is about something every parent fears." He paused. "A missing child." The jury leaned forward slightly. Hendrickson gestured toward my parents. For 29 years, Mark and Linda Carter lived every day wondering where their daughter went. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. They searched. They begged authorities for help. They never stopped hoping. Then Hendrickson turned toward me, until one day they discovered something shocking. He lowered his voice. Their daughter was alive, and the man who had taken her had hidden her identity for decades. He spread his hands dramatically. "And now the woman sitting over there refuses to acknowledge the parents who brought her into this world." The jurors glanced in my direction, some curious, some skeptical. Hendrickson delivered the final line with perfect timing. "They are not here for revenge. They are here for justice." He sat down. The room buzzed with whispers. Ruiz leaned toward me. "He's good." "Yes, but he just made one mistake." "What's that?" I looked across the courtroom at my parents. They believed their own story. The first witness was my mother. Linda Carter walked to the stand slowly, fragile, emotional. She swore the oath with trembling hands. Then Hendrickson began his questions. "Mrs. Carter, can you tell the jury about the day your daughter disappeared?" Her voice cracked immediately. "It was the worst day of my life." She described the bus station, buying tickets, turning around, finding me gone. "I screamed her name," she said. "I ran through the entire station looking for her." Her shoulders shook as she cried. "I thought someone had taken my baby." The jurors watched sympathetically. Even I had to admit she was convincing. Then Hendrickson asked the question he had clearly been saving. "Mrs. Carter, did you ever stop searching for your daughter?" She shook her head firmly. "Never. Not for a second. For nearly 3 decades, she claimed they hired investigators, printed flyers, contacted police departments across the country. We refused to give up. The lie hung in the air like thick smoke." Ruiz stood when it was his turn. He approached the witness stand calmly. "Mrs. Carter," he began politely, "you said you searched for your daughter continuously?" "Yes." "For 29 years?" "Yes." "For 29 years?" "Yes." "Never stopped?" "Never." Ruiz nodded thoughtfully. Then he walked to the evidence table and picked up a document. "Mrs. Carter, do you recognize this?" He handed it to the court clerk, who passed it to her. She glanced at the page. Her expression barely changed. "It looks like a legal document." "Correct." Ruiz turned toward the jury. "This is a settlement agreement dated March 1998. He faced my mother again. "You signed this document, didn't you?" "Yes." "And your husband signed it as well?" "Yes." Ruiz nodded. "Could you read the highlighted line aloud for the court?" She hesitated slightly. Then she read, "We acknowledge that our daughter Olivia Carter is presumed deceased and accept this settlement as final compensation for the loss of our child." The courtroom went silent. Ruiz spoke softly. "Mrs. Carter, if you believed your daughter was alive, why did you sign a document declaring her dead?" Her mouth opened, closed. Hendrickson jumped to his feet. "Objection. Mischaracterizing the circumstances of the settlement." "Sustained," the judge said. But the damage had already begun. The jurors were looking at my mother differently now. Not with sympathy, with suspicion. Ruiz returned to a seat without another question. The crack in their story had appeared, but we weren't ready to break it open yet. Not until the next witness. The defense didn't call experts. We didn't call investigators. We called only one person. A woman sitting quietly in the back row of the courtroom. When Ruiz said her name, the reaction was immediate. "The defense calls Emily Carter." My father jerked upright in his chair. My mother gasped. "Their daughter. The child they kept." Emily walked slowly down the aisle. She was 29 years old, almost the exact age I had been when Daniel Whitmore died. She had our father's eyes, our mother's cheekbones, and an exhaustion in her posture that told a much deeper story. When she reached the stand, she didn't look at our parents. She looked at me, like someone seeing a ghost. She swore the oath. Ruiz approached gently. "Emily, could you tell the jury your relationship to the plaintiffs?" "They're my parents." "And Olivia Carter." She swallowed. "She's my sister." The word hung in the air. First time anyone had said it in court. Ruiz nodded. "Emily, can you describe what it was like growing up in your household after Olivia disappeared?" She took a deep breath. Then she said something none of us expected. "It was like living with a ghost." The jurors leaned forward again. Ruiz kept his voice soft. "What do you mean?" Emily folded her hands together tightly. "My sister was everywhere. Her picture was in the living room. Her name came up in every conversation." She paused. "But it wasn't about Miss missing her. Ruiz waited. What was it about? Emily's voice dropped. It was about using her. The courtroom froze. She continued slowly. My parents told everyone the tragedy destroyed them. The church collected donations. Neighbors brought food. People gave them money for years. Tears filled her eyes. They built their entire lives around the story of their missing daughter. Ruiz asked the final question carefully. Did they ever search for her? Emily shook her head. No. A whisper ran through the gallery. They never searched. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small cardboard box. When I cleaned out her attic last month, she said quietly, I found something. She opened the box. Inside were dozens of faded receipts. Ruiz held one up for the jury. Casino slips. Dated November 1997, the same week I had been abandoned. Emily's voice trembled. While the police were looking for Olivia, my parents were at the Black Hawk Casino. The room went completely silent, and the lie my parents had told for nearly 30 years finally began to collapse. Silence can feel different depending on who it belongs to. There's the kind that crushes you, the kind that filled the bus station when I finished counting 200 buses and realized my parents were never coming back. And then there's the kind that crushes someone else. The silence in the courtroom after Emily revealed the casino receipts belonged to my parents. You could feel it spreading through the room like cold water. No one moved. No one spoke. The jurors stared at the slips of paper in Daniel Ruiz's hand. Each receipt had a timestamp. Each one proved the same thing. While the police searched Union Station for a missing 6-year-old girl, Mark and Linda Carter were placing bets. My mother finally snapped first. That's not what it looks like, she shouted. The judge slammed the gavel. Mrs. Carter, you will remain silent unless you are answering a question. My mother sank back into her seat, breathing hard. My father refused to look at anyone. Ruiz placed the receipts gently on the evidence table. Then he walked back toward Emily. Did your parents ever explain these receipts? He asked. Emily shook her head. I didn't even know they existed until a few weeks ago. What did they tell you about your sister growing up? Emily wiped her eyes. They said she was taken, kidnapped. They said someone lured her away when they turned their backs for a moment. Ruiz nodded. And did you believe them? Of course I did. Her voice broke slightly. They were my parents. That sentence carried a weight I understood perfectly. Children believe their parents because they have to. If we didn't, the world would feel too dangerous. Ruiz thanked her and stepped away, but the damage was already done. The story my parents had carefully built over nearly 30 years had started to fracture, and everyone in that courtroom could see the cracks spreading. During the lunch recess, the courthouse hallway exploded with reporters, microphones, cameras, flashing lights. Every news station in Denver wanted a statement. My attorney and I slipped into a side conference room to avoid the chaos. Ruiz closed the door and leaned against it. That went better than expected. Emily did most of the work. True. He poured himself a glass of water. But the case isn't over yet. I knew that. Right now, the jury had seen evidence of gambling and questionable behavior, but we hadn't shown them the real weapon yet. The affidavit. The document where my parents had declared their daughter dead in exchange for money. Ruiz sat across from me. You ready for the second half? I nodded. I've been ready for 30 years. He studied my face for a moment. You haven't spoken to them once since this started. No, not even today. I shrugged slightly. What would I say? He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. There was nothing left to say to people who had already sold you once. When court resumed that afternoon, my father's attorney tried to recover control of the narrative. Hendrickson stood and adjusted his tie before addressing the jury. Let me be clear, he said. The casino receipts presented earlier prove only one thing. He held up one of the slips. That a grieving couple sought distraction after their daughter's disappearance. Some jurors frowned. Others looked unconvinced. But Hendrickson pressed forward confidently. People cope with trauma in different ways. He turned toward Emily. Miss Carter discovered these receipts recently, correct? Yes. And you don't know the emotional state your parents were in at that time? Emily hesitated. No. Hendrickson nodded. So it's possible they were simply trying to escape overwhelming grief. Emily didn't respond, because she didn't need to. The jury had already seen enough to feel uneasy. Still, Hendrickson managed to plant a small seed of doubt, and that was all a good defense lawyer needed. When he finished, he sat down with a satisfied expression. He thought he had stabilized the situation. Then Ruiz stood up again, and carried a thin yellow folder toward the judge's bench. This was the moment we had been waiting for. Ruiz handed the document to the court clerk. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce Exhibit 42. The clerk passed the folder to the judge. She adjusted her glasses and began reading. At first, her expression remained neutral. Then it changed. Her eyebrows lowered slightly. The courtroom waited. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Ruiz, she said slowly, is this document authentic? Yes, Your Honor. Certified copy. Obtained obtained directly from Denver County Court archives. She studied the page again before nodding. Very well. She turned toward the jury. This document will be entered into evidence. Then she looked at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I believe you should see this as well. The clerk carried the copy to their table. My mother glanced at it first. The color drained from her face instantly. My father leaned closer. And for the first time since the trial began, I saw real fear in his eyes. Ruiz addressed the court calmly. This document is a sworn affidavit dated March 1998. He turned toward the jury. It was signed by the plaintiffs during their civil settlement with Greyhound Bus Lines. He paused. Then he read the key sentence. We acknowledge that our daughter Olivia Carter is presumed deceased and accept this settlement as final compensation for the loss of our child. The room went dead quiet. No whispers. No shifting chairs. Just silence. Ruiz walked slowly toward the jury box. Let me explain the significance of this statement. He pointed toward my parents. These two individuals accepted $520,000 from a transportation company in exchange for legally declaring their daughter dead. He let that sink in. The jurors exchanged stunned looks. Then Ruiz delivered the final blow. If Olivia Carter was dead in 1998, he gestured toward me. Then the people suing her today are committing fraud upon this court. Across the room, Hendrickson slowly sat down. He understood the problem immediately. My parents had created an impossible situation for themselves. Either they admitted they lied to Greyhound in 1998 to collect $500,000, or they maintained that their daughter had died, which meant the woman sitting in the courtroom could not possibly be their child, and therefore they had no legal claim to her inheritance. The judge leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, she said quietly, you now face a very serious contradiction. She held up the affidavit. You signed a sworn statement declaring your daughter deceased. Then she gestured toward me. And yet today you claim she is alive and entitled to inheritance rights through you. Her voice hardened. One of those statements must be false. My mother began shaking her head. My father stared at the table. The trap had closed, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. But I wasn't finished yet, because there was still something I needed to say. For 30 years, I had carried the memory of that bus station inside me. The little girl counting buses. The cold realization that her parents weren't coming back. Now, those same parents were sitting 10 feet away, cornered, exposed. Ruiz glanced at me. A silent question. Do you want to speak? I stood up slowly. The entire courtroom turned toward me. For the first time since the trial began, I walked toward my parents. Not as a daughter, not even as a judge, just as the person they had abandoned. They looked up as I stopped in front of their table. My mother's lips trembled. Olivia! Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I spoke calmly. You didn't just leave me at a bus station. My father flinched. You sold me. My words echoed through the silent courtroom. You took $500,000 and signed a document saying I was dead. My mother started crying. Real tears this time. Not the controlled performance from earlier. We were desperate, she whispered. We didn't know what else to do. I shook my head. No. You knew exactly what you were doing. I leaned closer. You turned your own daughter into a financial transaction. Neither of them could meet my eyes. For a moment, I considered all the things I might say next, all the anger I could release. But in the end, I chose something simpler. The little girl you left at that bus station, I said quietly. She died a long time ago. I straightened and stepped back. And the woman standing here today, I paused, doesn't belong to you anymore. Behind me, the judge lifted her gavel, and the sound that followed would change everything. The gavel struck the bench with a sound that cracked through the courtroom like thunder. Order in the court. Judge Rebecca Harlan's voice was calm, but the tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Everyone knew what had just happened. The lie had been exposed. Not a small lie. Not a misunderstanding. A 30-year fraud. My parents sat frozen at their table. The affidavit still lay open in front of them like a confession written in ink. Their attorney, Paul Hendrickson, slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I could see the exact moment when he mentally stepped away from them. Good lawyers know when a case is lost. And Hendrickson knew. The judge leaned forward slightly. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, she said. Her voice carried the same tone I used when sentencing criminals in my own courtroom. Your sworn statement from 1998 clearly indicates that you accepted a settlement based on the presumed death of your daughter. She taps the document with one finger. And yet today you claim she is alive and that you retain parental rights over her estate. My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The judge continued. This presents the court with two possibilities. She raised one finger. Either you committed fraud in 1998 by falsely declaring your daughter deceased in order to obtain a settlement, then a second finger. Or Therefore, you are committing fraud upon this court today by falsely claiming this woman is your daughter. The jurors sat perfectly still. Even the reporters had stopped typing. The judge's eyes hardened. Which is it? My parents didn't answer. They couldn't because either option meant prison. Hendrickson slowly stood. Your Honor, he hesitated. I believe my clients would like to consult with counsel. The judge nodded once. Granted. Court will recess for 15 minutes. The gavel struck again, and the room exploded into whispers. My parents were rushed into a small conference room with their attorney. Ruiz and I stayed at the defense table. The reporters were practically vibrating with excitement. They could smell blood. Ruiz leaned toward me. Well, he said quietly, that went about as well as possible. They're finished. Legally? Yes. He nodded toward the hallway. But this is bigger than the lawsuit now. He was right. Fraud cases involving $500,000 don't just disappear, especially when the evidence is signed and notarized. A bailiff approached our table. Judge Carter? Yes? The district attorney would like a word. I followed him into a side office. District Attorney Laura Chen stood near the window reviewing a copy of the affidavit. She looked up when I entered. Quite a document. I thought you might find it interesting. Chen gave a dry smile. That's one way to describe it. She closed the folder. Did you know about this settlement before your investigator found it? No. Your parents never mentioned it. Not once. She studied my face carefully. Then I suppose you understand what happens next. I nodded. They're going to be charged. Most likely. Chen tapped the document again. $520,000 obtained under false pretenses. She paused. And perjury in open court today. She walked past me toward the door. This trial might end today, but their legal problems are just beginning. 15 minutes later, everyone returned to the courtroom. My parents looked different now. The confidence from the morning had vanished. Their shoulders sagged. Their eyes darted nervously around the room. Hendrickson stood slowly. Your Honor. He cleared his throat. My clients would like to withdraw their claim. A murmur swept through the gallery. The judge tilted her head slightly. You're asking to dismiss the case? Yes. With prejudice? Hendrickson hesitated. Yes, Your Honor. The judge folded her hands. That is an unusual request after initiating litigation of this magnitude. My clients believe it is in everyone's best interest. The judge considered that for a moment. Then she looked toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. She turned back to my parents. Before I grant this request, her voice sharpened. I want to make something very clear. She lifted the affidavit again. This court cannot ignore evidence of potential fraud. My father visibly stiffened. The judge continued. Therefore, regardless of the outcome of this civil matter, I am formally referring this case to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother burst into tears. My father grabbed the edge of the table like he might fall. The judge raised the gavel. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. Chaos erupted immediately. Reporters rushed toward the doors. Camera crews scrambled into the hallway. Bailiffs tried to maintain order. And through it all, I simply stood there, watching. My parents remained seated for several seconds, like they didn't understand what had just happened. Then officers approached their table. Mr. Passett, Carter, Mrs. Carter. My mother looked up in panic. Yes, you need to come with us. For what? She whispered. The officer spoke calmly. You are being detained pending investigation of fraud and perjury. My father's face turned pale. You can't arrest us. No one said arrest. The officer gestured toward the door. But you will be accompanying us to the station. My parents began shouting, protesting, crying, but the officers were already guiding them out of the courtroom. For a brief moment, my mother looked back, her eyes on mine. Olivia, she sobbed, please. It was the same word she used 30 years ago, when she told me to wait on that bench. For just a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. The bus station, the counting, the cold realization. But this time, I didn't feel 6 years old. I felt calm, complete. I turned away before she could say anything else. Outside the courthouse, the media storm was unbelievable. Microphones pushed forward. Cameras flashed. Questions flew from every direction. Judge Carter, do you have a statement? Did you know your parents committed fraud? Will you press charges? Ruiz raised his hands. No comment at this time. We pushed through the crowd toward the parking lot. Just as we reached the car, a quiet voice called out behind us. Olivia. I turned. Emily stood near the courthouse steps. She looked exhausted, like someone who had just survived an earthquake. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Two sisters who had lived completely different lives, connected by the same people. I didn't know, she said quietly. I believe you. Tears filled her eyes. I thought they loved you. I nodded slowly. So did I. She looked down at the pavement. I'm sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. Emily wiped her eyes. They're still my parents. I know. No. And now everyone hates them. I considered that, then shook my head. No, they did that to themselves. She nodded slowly. I just didn't want you to think I was part of it. You weren't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Emily asked the question I had been expecting. What happens now? I looked up at the courthouse. Police cars still lined the street. Reporters were broadcasting live updates. Now, I said quietly, now they face the consequences. But the truth was, their consequences were only beginning. The news cycle lasted exactly 12 days. That's how long it took for the story to burn through every local station in Colorado and start spreading across national media. At first, the headlines were confused. Judges' parents accused of fraud after inheritance lawsuit collapses. Then the details started leaking. The bus station, the abandonment, the $500,000 settlement, the affidavit declaring their own daughter dead. By the end of the week, the headlines became much simpler. Parents sold daughter for $520,000. You could almost feel public sympathy shifting like sand in a storm. The same reporters who had interviewed my mother about her missing child story were now running investigative pieces about her gambling history. Old neighbors started talking, former co-workers, members of the church my parents used to attend. Everyone suddenly had stories. Stories about borrowed money that was never repaid. Stories about lies that didn't quite add up. Stories about a couple who always seemed to find a way to turn tragedy into profit. It was like watching a house slowly collapse when someone removed the first brick. 3 weeks after the trial ended, the district attorney held a press conference. I watched it quietly from my living room. District Attorney Laura Chen stood behind a podium surrounded by microphones. Her voice was steady. After reviewing evidence presented during the Carter civil case, the district attorney's office has filed formal charges against Mark Carter and Linda Carter. She listed them one by one. Insurance fraud, civil fraud, perjury, falsifying sworn statements. The reporters began shouting questions. Are they facing prison time? Was the settlement money recovered? Chen answered calmly. If convicted, the defendants face a combined sentence of up to 15 years. The cameras flashed. Another reporter spoke up. What about the woman they abandoned? Has she been involved in this investigation? Chen shook her head. Judge Olivia Carter is not a party to the criminal case. Then she added something that made my chest tighten slightly. She was simply the victim. The word felt strange. Victim. For most of my life, I had tried not to think of myself that way. But maybe she was right. Maybe I had been one once. The criminal trial was much shorter than the civil case. Fraud cases often are, especially when the evidence includes signed documents and court transcripts. My parents tried one final strategy. They claimed the affidavit had been misunderstood, that the phrase presumed deceased was just legal language, that they never truly believed I was dead. But the prosecution had the casino receipts, the settlement records, the sworn testimony from the civil trial. And most importantly, they had time, because the timeline made everything clear. My parents had accepted a settlement based on my supposed death, then spent nearly 30 years living comfortably off that money. And only when they learned about my inheritance did they suddenly rediscover their lost daughter. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the verdict came back, I wasn't in the courtroom. I didn't feel the need to be. But Ruiz called me that evening. They were found guilty. His voice was calm, both of them. I leaned back in my chair. How long? 8 years for your father, 6 for your mother. I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Did they say anything? Ruiz hesitated. Your mother tried to apologize, and she said she made a mistake. I stared at the blue scarf resting on the arm of my couch. A mistake. That word again. People love calling terrible decisions mistakes. Like leaving a child in a bus station is the same thing as forgetting to buy milk. Did you tell her anything? Ruiz asked. No. Why not? Because there was nothing left to say. Some stories end long before the courtroom. 6 months later, the media had moved on to other scandals, other tragedies, other headlines. The world is very good at forgetting, but some things stay. One afternoon, I sat in a small office building near downtown Denver. Across the desk sat Emily, my sister. The words still felt strange. We had been meeting regularly for the past few months. Coffee shops, walks in the park, long conversations about a childhood we never shared. Emily had left Colorado after the trial. She needed distance from everything that happened, but she came back recently with an idea. I want to help, she said quietly. Help with what? She She looked around the office, at the empty desks, the stacks of paperwork, the framed legal certificate on the wall, the foundation. After the criminal trial ended, I had made a decision about the inheritance. Daniel Whitmore had saved my life, not just by taking me in, but by showing me what real kindness looked like. Keeping $7 million for myself didn't feel right, so I created something new, the Second Chance Foundation, a legal support network for children aging out of the foster system, kids who suddenly find themselves alone at 18, no family, no guidance, no one to stand beside them in courtrooms or job interviews, the same kind of loneliness I had once known. Emily folded her hands. I spent my whole life hearing about the sister who disappeared, she said, and now I finally get to know her. She looked at me carefully. I'd like to work here. What would you do? Anything. She smiled faintly. I'm good with people. That was true. Emily had become a social worker years earlier, maybe because deep down she always sensed something broken in our family. I considered her request, then nodded. Welcome aboard. For the first time since the trial ended, Emily laughed. It was a small sound, but it felt like something healing. That winter, Denver received its first snowfall in early December. The city looked different under snow, quieter, softer. I walked through a small park near my house one evening after work. The air was cold enough to sting your lungs. I wrapped the blue scarf tighter around my neck. I had kept it all these years. At first it was protection, then it became a reminder. Now it was just a scarf, a piece of fabric, nothing more. I sat on a bench overlooking the frozen pond. Snowflakes drifted slowly through the air. Somewhere in the distance, children were laughing, their parents calling them inside for dinner. Normal sounds. Ordinary life. For a long time, I believed my story started with abandonment, with loss, with that cold bus station bench. But Daniel Whitmore had once told me something different. You weren't left behind, he said. You were found. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Now I did. Because that night in the bus station, a stranger had stepped forward. A man who saw a child sitting alone and decided she mattered. That moment changed everything, not just for me, but for every kid the foundation would help in the future. Sometimes the people who abandon you think they control your story, but they don't. They only write the first chapter. The rest is yours. I stood up and brushed the snow off the bench. Then I walked home to the quiet streets, the scarf trailing behind me in the wind, not as armor, not as a shield, just a reminder that even the people who try to erase you don't get the final word.